There we go, record. And we're rolling. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Samantha and we'll get this thing going.
All right, I am going to share my screen. Oh, I'm not able to do that. Steve, can you make me a host so that I can share my screen?
You can walk me through that? Yes.
If you click on participants, you should be able to hover over my name, click more, and then change it from there.
There you go.
Thank you. Also, if my Wi-Fi starts to go weird, can someone just let me know so that I can try a different hotspot? That would be great. Okay. All right. So I wanted to start, can everyone see this normal? It's just the main screen. Okay, great. I want to start out just by sharing a couple of slides of some data that Steve was mentioning just about how we are seeing suicide and substance use and the correlation between that. And then I really just want this to be a discussion between all of us. Like, what are we seeing in our communities? How are you all addressing this issue? How do we want to address this issue now that we know this data? So I want to start off just by sharing some things that we have found out about this. And again, this is from the Missouri Student Survey. The latest one was from 2020, so we have some really updated information on this. Starting off with, we know that students who are seriously considering suicide are more likely to use or misuse substances. And one of the big things is that we've been able to take that with knowing from specific substances. So with alcohol, 22% of students who are seriously considering suicide are also currently using alcohol. So if they check that box, yes, I'm seriously considering suicide, 22% of those also checked, yes, I'm currently using alcohol. Whereas 6.9% of those students who said that they weren't considering suicide were currently using alcohol. And then same goes with marijuana. 20.5% of students who said, yes, I'm seriously considering suicide, also said that they were currently using alcohol, whereas right around 5% said that if they weren't considering suicide, they checked that they were considering, that they were currently using marijuana. And then with prescription drugs, right around 15% of students who were seriously considering suicide were also using prescription drugs, and around 7% who said they weren't considering suicide were currently using prescription drugs. So with that, we know that if a student is considering suicide, they're more likely to also be using a substance, where if they're not considering suicide, some are still using substances, but it's a much lower percentage. So does that all make sense? I know that's kind of weirded in a weird way, but it really does show that correlation there. And we can go back if you all have questions about that after you're kind of pondering this, let me know. Also from the Missouri Student Survey, we found out that 22% of Missouri 10th graders report misusing prescription drugs just to help them feel better. And we also know that the consequences of substance use can be a risk factor for suicide. And what I mean by that is some of the things that come along with using substances, like being anxious and having panic attacks, or like having those mood swings that are really high and really low, those can put someone at a higher risk for suicide. And one of the biggest ones is impulsivity. We know that people that are considering suicide, if they're not using substances, they can oftentimes think through, okay, what are some coping strategies that I use when I have these thoughts? I can call the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. I can call someone that I trust. I can drive myself to the hospital, and they're able to think through some of those coping strategies to hopefully, negate those thoughts or help kind of put them to the side and get the help that they need. Whereas someone that might be having those thoughts and then they're also misusing substances, that impulsivity that comes alongside with using substances can really put them at a higher risk to almost have that tunnel vision where they're having those thoughts and now they're not able to think of any other type of coping strategy that they have. And so they act on those thoughts really quickly, which is definitely a really a really big concern and something to be aware of. And I think I saw something in the chat. Oh, okay. We'll see you soon, Amanda. Thanks for coming. All right, and then this is my last set of data points. Many suicides and suicide attempts involve consumption or overconsumption of substances. And these specific data points were from some research that I found from SAMHSA, the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration. And I have that in my notes in the PowerPoint, so I'll add that into the chat box as well. But what this showed was that 20% of suicide deaths in the US had opiates present, which included heroin and prescription medication. 30 to 40% of suicide attempts in the US involve alcohol intoxication, and a diagnosis of alcohol misuse or dependence is associated with a suicide risk that is 10 times greater than the suicide risk of the general population. And then same with individuals who inject drugs are at about a 14 times greater risk for suicide. And then lastly, of those who die by suicide, 90% have a diagnosable mental illness. And that can be of any sort. That can be a substance use disorder. That could be some type of mood disorder like depression or bipolar disorder. And roughly 50% of individuals with mental health disorders misuse substances. So that they might have a substance use disorder, or maybe they are just misusing substances. They're trying to self-medicate or cope with some of the mental health challenges that they're experiencing. So all good things to be aware of. Before I go into some of my questions, do any of you have questions about some of these things that I just shared? And you can just come off mute or share it in the chat box.
Does the 2020 data look different than the 2018 data? Were there any like trends?
So with this specific data that I shared, I don't know if we have that correlation data, and I believe Ricky's on here, so I could see if she knows if that's something we have. But we did see in Greene County specifically that seriously considering suicide went down in our 6th through 12th graders, which is amazing. We haven't seen that go down in a long time. In 2018, it was 18.3% of students were considering suicide, and it went down in 2020 to 14.7%, which is incredible. Obviously, still way too many youth considering suicide, but seeing that decrease has really brought me hope to know that the community and having conversations like this is making a difference, because people are reaching out to help these youth, and youth are feeling more comfortable to reach out and get help. Steve or Ricky, do you know if we have this correlation data from 2018 and if we've seen that change at all?
I have not seen this data. We could probably talk with Susan about, you know.
I put it in the chat. I'm looking for it right now.
Right.
I do have it somewhere, but I'm looking for it. So
Awesome.
yeah, let me circle back to that question.
Okay, thanks.
Samantha, could you repeat what the common mental illnesses are that are related to suicide and suicide attempt?
Yeah, the biggest one is depression. Not everyone that has depression is suicidal, but most people who are suicidal are depressed. That's the big one, but we really do see it with a variety of different mental health disorders, bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, even eating disorders is a big one for suicide. So those are some of the more common ones.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions before I turn it all on you and ask you questions? Okay, well, feel free to continue to ask as they come up. But the first one that I want to start out with is, how is your coalition, or how are you individually, if you're not a part of a coalition, addressing mental health and suicide in your community? What are some things that you all have done in the past few years to address this issue?
For the Newton County Community Coalition, we make sure that we have people, of course, on the board, as well as members in general that are part of the mental health community. So we have their input and ideas. And I know I participate in the Neosho School District's mental health committee meetings that they have once a month. And that gives us a real world view of, idea of what's going on in the school district specifically, because those are actual kids that have approached counselors or ones that the counselors have sought out because there's been an obvious need. And that data is fairly spot on with the survey that was taken statewide for our county. It's showing almost neck and neck, even with COVID numbers, but that is before signs of suicide training for this year.
Gotcha. Yeah, I think that what you said was so important, that we have representatives on our board, on our coalition, in the groups that we're working with, that can help kind of bring to light what's going on, because they're seeing that every day. And so they do just have more of that insight, and they'll know what's going to be the most impactful for your specific community. So thank you for sharing that. And also, Philip brought up signs of suicide. That's something that we try to do in every school district. So we train so that people know how to implement that program. And if any of you are in a school district and you're interested in doing that, let me know. We're actually having a signs of suicide implementer training, I believe on November 4th. And you can join us. It's a free training. You do have to pay to eventually have the kit to implement in your school district, but we would love to get you a part of that, because what it does is it teaches students how to recognize the signs of suicide in their peers, but then there's also an educational component where you can teach all the staff how to recognize that as well, and parents or guardians, so that everyone is on the same page for how to recognize the signs of suicide and then how to intervene and help out those students.
So would that be something that you would do in addition to teen mental health first aid?
Yes, with teen mental health first aid, since it's so new and it's just not as accessible right now for people, we do still recommend to do the signs of suicide. In the meantime, teen mental health first aid goes into a lot more depth. And so if that's something that a school district is able to do, I would highly recommend doing that. But both are really great trainings. It's just that signs of suicide is a quick, like 50-minute one for one class, and teen mental health first aid is a lot longer and more in depth. So I would recommend trying to do both if at all possible. But it's a good one if you can't do teen mental health. Oh, Ricky said she's ready for the data question that Ashley had. So yes, Ricky, feel free to unmute.
Hello, friends. So I have 2018 data. In 2018, alcohol was actually a little bit higher. So it was 27% for those seriously considering suicide versus the 22 right now. However, at the same time, the non-suicidal use was actually even higher. So it's 27 versus 12. Whereas in 2020 data, it was 22 versus 6.9. So that is, it kind of all moved up and down there. For marijuana, in 2018, it was 18% versus 6%. So that has increased to 20.5% compared to 5%. So that's a pretty big jump there for those seriously considering suicide using marijuana. And of course, we know that marijuana specifically has a large research-based connection to mental health issues, including the development of psychosis and schizophrenia. So that's an interesting note there as well. And then finally, for prescription drugs for non-medical use, it was about 16% versus, oh, I'm sorry, that's this year. Sorry. It was 17.5% versus 7%. And so this is a little bit better on that front at about 16% versus 7%. So that helps to kind of to summarize that for those who weren't tracking those numbers or jotting those down. Essentially, alcohol is about the same in the last 2 years. It's just that all of it has moved down a little bit, but both the same. Marijuana, we've seen a big increase in the marijuana use by those seriously considering suicide versus those not. And the prescription drugs has more or less stayed about the same.
Awesome. Thank you for looking into that for us. That's so interesting. I appreciate it.
Sam?
Yes.
Becky put a comment in the chat that she's doing Generation RX with the high school and has a 4-H project beginning in December where they will play a card game called Anchor Stress. And her hope is that it'll start talking about the mental health amongst elementary and middle school age students.
Awesome. That's great, Becky. Do you mind sharing a little bit about what anchor stress is? What that game?
Sure. It's basically go fish type game where the cards have a certain kind of fish, and it's, they kind of relate it to some kind of stress. But to match up, they match the little fish, but the actual cards have different questions on them. And there's actually 2 decks, one for youngers and one for olders. I got them here. Like one card, it says, what helps you feel more relaxed, playing with your favorite toys or playing with a pet? And when the kids draw, they have to read their question and answer. If you feel stressed, what would help you? Talking to a parent, playing outside, or reading quietly in your room. Please explain. So they're basically conversation starters, I think, more than anything, and hopefully to get kids to talk a little bit about their feelings and to encourage us adults to go ahead and talk about mental health. 4-H did a survey and like just recently, and like 60% of the students said that they feel like adults don't want to talk about mental health and that it needs to be talked about. So it's a hard, deep subject to get going. And, with 4-H, they get to choose basically what they're doing. So the way I'm doing this is I have a Zumba instructor that's volunteering to do Zumba with the kids for a half an hour. And then after that, we're going to spend the second half hour with the card game.
Fun. I love that. And I think it's a cool opportunity too for kids to start thinking about what is their coping strategies, because they might not even realize that the reason that they feel like they need to pet their animal or go on a walk or whatever it might be is to help relieve that stress. So it helps them to really think through that and process what would help them best. I really like that. It's great. And it looks like Philip posted a link to that game in the chat. Thank you so much. I need to check that out.
Becky, I have a question, and it may be just the way I'm thinking about it, but if they're 4-H in the 4-H program and 4-H involvement, are they primarily more a rural student, or, I mean, anyone can join 4-H? I'm just curious as to.
Anyone can join 4-H. I am in a very rural, high poverty county. This year, because of COVID, we've tried to do some things virtually. The thing with mental health, we have a whole curriculum on mental health for kids, but it's getting that audience to come in, and I don't care if it's the parents I get first or the kids or whatever. And I struggle with high school kids mainly because once they enter our high school, they quit 4-H and they join FFA. And so I kind of lose my contacts that way. And I only work part-time, so, trying to make some of those connections takes time. But honestly, we've worked on this for a couple of years, and I first I got in to do the generation prescription. Now this year, everything's pretty much moot because I can't get into school. But and now I'm going to try this, and I think slowly but surely we are making headways.
It's great. Anyone else want to share what their communities are doing?
I can share.
Okay.
Sorry for joining late.
Oh, it's okay.
I am Brad Brummel. I'm the Health and PE Coordinator for Springfield Public Schools. So some things that we started the year is I communicated the Missouri Health Student Survey results with the health teachers, 6th grade through high school. And I think that it's important that they understand that those results are available, and I think that it can kind of drive their instruction when it comes to planning those health lessons. We also encouraged health teachers to collaborate and connect with their site counseling team prior to the year starting. I was concerned with a lot of these health lessons, especially with sensitive topics, being completely virtual and students not having the services that they may need when going through a sensitive lesson like mental health. And it's kind of a double-edged sword, because I think also students are going to be more willing to share something virtually, because it's easier to send a message to a health teacher than it is to walk up to a teacher's desk and have that conversation. And so I wanted health teachers to be ready to support students. And it's easier for a student that maybe attends 3rd period and has that important health lesson to go walk down to the other side of the building and go see a counselor. Well, they can't do that when they're at home. And so we tried to brainstorm about how we can connect those site counseling services to our health instruction in a virtual way. And so a lot of our high schools and middle schools, their counseling teams have like Google Forms that students can submit to receive some support. And so we've tried to be intentional about taking those Google Forms and pulling them into our health lessons. So if a student is signing into a health instruction Zoom, or they're signing in to complete a asynchronous health assignment, that counseling Google form is right there in the same location, so that it's easier, there's more eyeballs on it, and it's more likely for students to actually find and complete. So those are just a couple things that we were trying to be intentional with at the beginning of this year. We're excited. We haven't got started yet, but I see Anna Jones is here. We're excited to get Generation RX into our high schools in a virtual guest speaker platform, and so we're excited to get that going. We also have Rebound Foundation and Harmony House doing virtual guest presentations in our high school health classes for dating violence and healthy relationships, because I think that a lot of times those high school relationships lead to a lot of depression, and I think that can be the starter for a lot of this. And so we're excited to continue that relationship, and we're just doing the best that we can in the circumstances. We would much rather have those presenters in person, but we will take the virtual instead of not having anything at all. So those are just a couple of the things, and enjoying listening to everyone. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. That's awesome what you guys are doing. So innovative. And I love that you thought to look at, okay, what are some of these survey results? And now how can we drive our lessons to revolve around what we think our students really need? I think that's so key and so important. And also ensuring that staff are communicating with other staff so that students have that well-rounded assistance and education at the same time. I think that's just great. And for those of you too that maybe you work in a coalition or with a specific organization that isn't in a school, I feel like we can still pull from that and share that information with the local schools that we work with and communicate with. Because I think what Brad shared was great, and having those Google forms so that students can fill those out and make sure that they're getting that help, since they're not able to just walk down the hall and go to a counselor. I think that's so key, especially in our time. What a great way to ensure that they're still getting help and connected to who they need to get connected to. Love it.
And Sam, the last thing I would share is that if you're working with schools, to have them check out Everfi. They've got some great digital courses that have really been big for us during this virtual time, because it's free and it's a platform that students can access at home. Teachers can assign what they want, but it's a great way to pick and choose what you want those students to do in that virtual platform. And it has a mental wellness basics course. It has a prescription drug safety course and an alcohol EDU course. Just those are some of the many. And I know there's several great things out there, but I think Everfi the one strength of EverFi currently is that it engages students while they're at home by themselves. It works well with them in that virtual at-home learning. So, and that's kind of what we're stuck in right now. So,
Yeah. And how do you spell that? Is it just EverFy?
FI.
FI. Okay.
And Heather Miller is our Missouri rep, and she is the one that kind of helps us get everything set up with our teachers and gives them access.
Okay.
And I can try to find her contact info and put it in the chat.
That'd be awesome.
But the nice thing with the EverFi courses is that it takes students through a pre and a post test for each course, but they don't really know they're doing a pre and post, but it has it set up that way. And so like we can find out what our students are struggling with. So I know that we had 64 students take the prescription drug safety course last year, and 34% of them, only 34% knew how to support their friend with prescription drug abuse. And so that was a really low score for a pretest for high school students, how to recognize misuse and abuse. And so that was something that we focused on at the beginning of the year, is how we could kind of build that up. And we saw only 41 students go through the mental wellness basics course 2 years ago. But last year, since that fourth quarter pushed us at home, we had 568 students use it, and that was a big jump for us. And so just taking advantage of digital resources when we're in this situation, I think is important. So EverFi is definitely a great resource.
Awesome. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, trying to get some positive action, even though it's a bit of a negative situation. I like that. Anything else that anyone wants to share on this before I ask you all another question? Okay, so my other question that I had was, now that we've heard this data and we've also heard people share on what their communities are doing, what are some steps that you all want to take now to address this issue that maybe you haven't done in the past, but you feel like, oh, you know, this is a big issue, or I hadn't even heard of that curriculum or whatever that might be. What kind of steps do you all want to take now after leaving here today? And I see Brad put the EverFi information in the chat box. Thank you. Ooh. Oh. Well, while you all are thinking of what you would like to do, I wanted to share a little bit about what at Community Partnership we offer. And you all, you know, got this invite because you're somehow connected to CPO. So you might know about some of these things, but I just wanted to share some of the things that we try to do. And Steve mentioned those at the beginning, and that's mental health first aid. We do youth mental health first aid and adult mental health first aid. And those trainings just teach you how to recognize the signs and symptoms that someone is struggling with a mental health challenge or a crisis, and then how to properly intervene and get them the help that they need. And that's for adults assisting youth or adults assisting adults. And right now we are offering those virtually, and we can offer those to you for free. So if your coalition or your organization are interested, or if just your community wants to host one, I would be happy to coordinate that with you. And then again, we offer those signs of suicide trainings. So if that's something that you want to bring to your community, let me know. We also do Qpr trainings, which is question, persuade, refer. And that's just a quick, like 1 hour suicide prevention training where you learn a really quick action plan. And again, you learn those signs of suicide for adults and youth and how to intervene. And that's just a quick one. So if you and your organization want to do like a lunch and learn, we can do something over Zoom for you. It's a really great training. It does not, it's not in place of an adult or youth mental health first aid training, but it is still some really great information. And if you can't commit to youth or adult mental health first aid, I think that's a good place to start. So those are some trainings that we can offer. We've also done a lot of media campaigns. So that's something that I recommend doing if you can, do some ads on Facebook that have destigmatizing messages. And we have some that are created. So if you wanted to use those, you totally can. We've also done, crisis text line PSAs on our local news stations so that that phone number gets out there for people. So lots of different ways that we can help address this issue, some simpler than others. But there's all good options out there. And I'm going to put my email in the chat. So if you are interested in receiving some of those materials or attending a training, you can just email me and we can chat. So I just gave you all some time. What are some things that you all want to do in your community after you leave here today? Anything?
So I would love any of those training opportunities. Is there any of them available in a recorded asynchronous format where teachers can watch on their own time, or whenever they're available during their own playing time, or does it all have to be live?
With the ones that I just shared, those have to be live.
Okay.
We are working with SPS specifically because we have a couple instructors for youth mental health first aid that work for SPS. And so SPS is covering the cost for those teachers to get a stipend when they're doing them on Saturdays so that teachers can get paid that extra money for attending that. So I can connect you with Allison Roffers if that's something you're interested in, because we are doing some type of partnership with Springfield Public Schools for that. And but with QPR as well, they are not allowing us fidelity wise to do that recording. But I can look into some other options as well if we need to find something that we can record. But with a topic like mental health and suicide, I just feel like a live format is the best so we can get somewhat of a grasp on how people are responding to this content, because sometimes it can put people in a negative headspace, and we want to make sure that we're aware of that and that we're able to address that via chat or whatever it might be. So I can let you know though.
Okay. The other thing for me, when looking specifically at my curriculum, we did a kind of a community expert review of our drug abuse and substance abuse unit about a year ago. Ricky was part of that. Kara Irwin from Greene County Health Department. We had someone from Safe and Sober. We tried to get as many community experts as we could to meet with teachers to review the curriculum, because our curriculum is written by teachers for teachers, which is great. It just doesn't always have that expertise that so many of you bring. And so I would love to do that again in the future with our mental health unit, to bring in experts to collaborate with teachers to see how we can improve those learning activities to better our impact. So I would love to do that in the future.
Awesome. Great idea. Thanks, Brad. And Ricky said we'd love to be a part of that, Brad. And I agree. Well, Steve, do you have any questions or any comments that you want to share?
No, I didn't have any specific questions other than like you're prodding the audience to do now, more along the lines of, when you say, what are you doing in your community? Not everyone here is, I mean, the majority are right here in Springfield. So it doesn't necessarily mean what you're doing in the broader context of Springfield. What are you doing in your community? So maybe you drill that down to particular focus of a school you work with, or even in your personal life, if you're involved, let's say in a youth group of some sort. What is it that you're thinking to do, especially after we've had some of this conversation, or you're planning to do already, and maybe there's a way that we can help, support those efforts. Because I think, sometimes when we say, in your community, we think Springfield, we think, West Plains, or we think Neosho or whatever, but community to me can also mean where am I taking this information in my personal life? And oftentimes that's the part we say overlook, but we don't consider. So if we want to reframe it that way, what are some of the things that you might be able to think in terms of taking this into your personal life community?
I think
If-
that one thing that would be important is making sure that the people that we work with who are also working with kids know about all the available trainings. Because I think, before I worked at CPO, I didn't know any of them existed. And so just making sure that people know that they exist and that they're an option.
Yeah. Thanks, Ashley. And I see Becky put in the chat too. You saying that made me think maybe I can do something with my church's youth group by being a guest once or twice at their meetings. Yeah, that's great. It's a really, really good idea.
And that's one of the things that I try to preface when we do the mental health first aid trainings is, we oftentimes come to those trainings wearing our professional hat. We're doing it on company time, so to speak. Our organization sends us to get further training, and we think only through that narrow lens. But I only work, 8 to 80 hours a day. So I do have some personal time. So how do I remember that mental health first aid is really not just about what I do when I'm getting paid, so to speak? How can I bring this to my neighborhood or to my youth group or to my family? Not qualified for that last one, but I just use that as an example.
If you all are not a part of Greene County specifically, or you want your specific county data for what we shared about that correlation, Susan Depew with MIMH, which is Missouri Institute for Mental Health, I believe, she's the one that she puts together the Missouri Student Survey, her and her team, and she extracted all that data for us. So we'd be happy to put you in contact with her if you're wanting to know that information for your county. So if you just email me again in the chat, I can connect you with her, or whoever you work with from CPO, your prevention specialist, they can help you as well.
And just to kind of flesh that out a little bit, Susan is, just a numbers genius when it comes to really, drawing correlations between what if they're doing this and is that happening? And so, that might be even a conversation we could have to, there's 3 good correlations that Sam shared in her presentation, but I'm always amazed at how she's able to take, data and really bring some usable life to it. So we can think outside the box about how, if this is happening, could that be happening, and be able to refine that search. And that's not something that we specifically can do, but Susan can certainly do it from the back end of all the data that she's working with. And she's wonderful to work with. She's just a delightful person. So if you don't know Susan Depew, you need to know her.
Yes. Thanks for coming, Hannah. See your chat. All right.
What else?
I just want to mirror Steve. I agree with that. I mean, it's kind of a situational thing. Although, of course, for personal safety reasons, you have to be careful, of course, when you're not at work and you're out in public, let's say Walmart. It's always good to be aware of when someone may be having a mental health crisis. And if it's safe to do so at the time, assist until you can call on other entities come in and take care of things. So I do agree with your statement. I'm glad you said that.
Yeah, it's always a good reminder that, this information goes beyond just our everyday interaction in work, and to remember to think through, like, your spouse's little cousin who's still in high school. You can still have those conversations with them. It doesn't have to be a client or, so yeah, thanks for that reminder, Steve.
And the other thing is this is the simplest part of it all. Tell 3 people what we talked about today. And what I mean by that is, if we're talking about it, we're making a difference, because I come from a world where this type of subject matter was not discussed. And if it was done in a shaming or a stigmatizing manner. It was not brought out as something that was serious or a legitimate topic of conversation. And that I'm referencing both mental health challenges and substance misuse. That's just not something that from my world was ever taken seriously and talked about with any type of credibility. And so if we're talking about it, we are making a difference. And in that talking about it, maybe we come up with new and innovative ways to take this information to a community we've not served. You know, for instance, like Becky said, maybe I should see if I can be a guest speaker at my youth group. Just having that conversation out loud begins to facilitate new ideas about how to change the tone around mental health, because it's still very much stigmatized. I'd like to think that because I do it all the time and talk about it all the time and train about it all the time, that things are better, and they are, but it's still way too stigmatized.
Yeah.
Any other thoughts, comments, questions, concerns? Well, I appreciate everybody joining us today. Thank you, Samantha, for taking the time to share a little bit with our audience about the correlation. And I know when Ricky was the one that kind of brought this up in a staff meeting, the data that Sam shared in her slide for 2020, and it was just, for me, it's just kind of stuck with me. It's like this conversation, this intersection between substance use and mental health challenges is overshadowed. You know, I did a post for our Facebook page first part of the week, and the gist of it is overarching, people still believe underage drinking is just something the kids do, you know, and then if they don't want to, if they agree with that, then they'll say, but that's why marijuana is safer and they should do that. You know, it's like, let's skirt the real issue, and underlying the misuse of these substances too often, as the data shows, is a mental health challenge that's not even getting looked at. You know, it just gets dismissed as, well, you know, kids are depressed because they're growing up, or kids are overexcited because they're going through that phase in their life or whatever. And that may not be the case, because again, nobody stopped long enough to say, let's talk about this and see what's really happening here, and make a decision to look at the two things, because they're coinciding for a reason. So the more we can talk about it, the better off the kiddos are going to be.
Well, even, you know, a lot of people dismiss it as peer pressure too. So I do agree with that. And in those that are more into the mental health world than I am might correct me, but I believe that's strongly a mental health issue also, because how is it not? You know, you're feeling peer pressure, that pressure being the key word, to be cool and drink in the high school parking lot late at night or whatever the case may be. So I think it's critical, like you said, to not have the good old boy syndrome, is what I call it, and just dismiss that as, oh, I was a stupid teenager too. That's not right. You know, just because we did something then doesn't mean it's right now.
Right.
Really good, Philip. Thank you.
And we all seem to know on some level that apples and oranges don't equate. You know, what happened when I was a teen, you know, back when we still used chalkboards, and what's happening in the life of a teen today is night and day different. And we can always point to the most obvious. I did not have social media when I was a teen. It's changed the way teens interact with one another and how they live their lives. And by that default, it's going to have a different impact on their mental health than my mental health had, you know, without social media. So that's, again, another reason why we need to be drawing this out, not saying what happened to me or with me or what I did as a teen is not part of the equation for today. We know that. It's just hard for us to stop and say, yeah, you're right, you know. Anybody else? I appreciate everybody being here with us today. I have a couple of things. One, The next prevention perk that we have, we're going to talk about another, I'll call it phenomenon, epidemic, if you will. We're going to talk about vaping, electronic cigarette or Juul devices. And we're still working on who's going to be joining me for that. I may end up being the expert talking about it, but we are working on having someone as a guest to visit about that. And I'm hoping that our audience will come prepared to talk about what that looks like, especially I know Philip's in the schools on a regular basis, and Becky's talked about that, and Brad as well. And that is certainly something that, you know, I can point to and say, we had no idea what a vaping device was, 5 years ago. So it has changed. And how is that impacting schools and the community and the lives of adolescents? So I think it'll be a great subject to talk about. And I'm hoping that we have some good dialogue about not just what the problem is, but what can we do going forward to help address that issue in our communities and in the schools. And the other thing is, it is the prevention perk. I haven't seen a whole lot of coffee drinking going on here this morning, but for those of you that do indulge in the caffeinated beverage, I've made, Brad's got one going there. I made the pledge that we would be giving away coffee as part of the prevention perk. So if you're interested, in the chat, I've got a number in here between 1 and 100. The closest number wins a coffee supply from the best, sorry to be biased, the best coffee shop in Springfield, Big Mama's. So if you are a coffee drinker and you want to participate, don't be shy. Well, that's interesting. Roman and Brad almost picked the same number.
Mm-hmm. We've got some competition going.
I know it.
Ashley's being a rebel there.
Perpetual 17-year-old. All right. Another second or so, everybody. Everybody in that wants to be in? All right, the winner is Brad Brummel, the coffee guru himself. The number I picked was 65, and he picked 72. So,
Hey.
Congratulations, Brad. I'll get you hooked up with, again, I don't know what your favorite is, but I'm biased. Big Mama's all the way.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Any other thoughts about the prevention perk before we wrap it up for today? And hopefully you can join us next time. And I'll be better prepared, and my computer will be cooperative.
Thank you all for the great conversation.
Thank you. This is a really good idea, by the way. My boss at Crowder was actually raving about how, actually, let me rephrase that. She was jealous that you guys came up with this idea first. So good job. This is really neat.
Thanks.
Okay, everyone. Have a wonderful day.